Good evening. It's been a week of debates, handshakes, arguments and an ambassadorial resignation as the race to become our next Prime Minister in less than 2 weeks goes on. Boris Johnson or Jeremy Hunt will be in number 10 very soon. So up for discussion tonight. They've been questioned in Exeter. Tomorrow it's Gloucestershire as time runs out to win over members. Plus, with promises to improve our roads and rail, who'll deliver best for the West Country? And we're off! Anne Widdecombe's made her mark in the EU Parliament. Our MEPs talk climate change and Brexit. And joining me in the studio tonight, we have Torbay's convert to the Boris Johnson cause, the Conservative MP Kevin Foster, and later on in the programme, Gloucester MP and key Jeremy Hunt backer Richard Graham will be here. Kevin, good evening. Thank you for coming in. You, of course, during the MP stages of voting, backed Sajid Javid until he was knocked out. Why choose Boris Johnson in the final two?
Well, when I looked at the final two, I looked at who was going to be the most likely to deliver for Torbay, and particularly in terms of getting on and delivering Brexit, issues such as the police, and also about who can actually bring our parliamentary party together to get on and govern this country. And I felt that Boris Johnson was best placed to do that.
Of course, when we look at the recent MEP elections, which of course Theresa May got her way and the deal which you voted for gone through, they wouldn't have happened. But your constituency, and I know Torbay was counted by council areas, there's probably a few change in the area, but was the only part of the West Country where the Brexit party won more than half of the votes. Are you particularly concerned about the rise of the Brexit party personally then?
Well, let's be clear, the European election had about half the turnout a general election would expect, but it's no surprise that people in Torbay want to see the result they voted for 3 years ago implemented, and that's what I want to see as their Member of Parliament. I voted for the deal 3 times, not because I thought it was the best thing I'd ever read, but because I recognised we needed to get on and deliver Brexit and ensure that we could be moving on to now discussing what we should be doing in the future relationship with the European Union, not how we leave. So that's where I think, for me, the priorities come, and obviously we'll need to do this before the next general election.
Now, in the ITV debate, the Prime Ministerial debate earlier this week, Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt clashed over when we leave the European Union. Boris Johnson says he is wedded to that 31st of October date. Do you think he can deliver it? Because it's not far away now.
Well, deadlines produce deals. One of the things from March is just delay does not resolve this issue. I think the one thing the whole country does not want is more delay, more indecision and more uncertainty. And that means we need to be clear that we are going to leave on October the 31st.
Do you want a no-deal Brexit, though?
Well, I don't want a no-deal Brexit. I don't think anyone should want a no-deal Brexit. But at the end of the day, we do have to implement the referendum result. But what I find quite galling is when people who voted against a deal 3 times say we should declare no to no deal. They're offering us sound bites, not solutions. OK, let's focus on the West Country a little bit. I said a few minutes ago that Jeremy Hunt and Boris Johnson were in Exeter. Let's have a little listen to some of the promises they made our part of the world.
This is the Great Southwest. In particular, I want to look, as I've said already, at the A303, at road connectivity. I think the A358 springs to mind, somebody who uses that quite a lot, the A38. There are things that we should be doing to improve road connectivity.
Train service to Devon and Cornwall is totally inadequate. I think that I'd like to see a much faster, smoother train service to the West Country, yes, because that is the foundation of prosperity. And that's good.
Promises that went down very well in the audience, I'm sure you're very glad to hear. But David Cameron made those promises, Theresa May's made them too. Why do you think these men, or in your case Boris Johnson, will actually deliver these infrastructure improvements?
Well, if you're travelling by train through Dawlish this evening, you can already see work starting on the new seawall, and the plans have already been announced for what will happen to help secure up the Teignmouth Cliff. So this isn't just promises, there's actually now real construction work going on site. We also have the advanced plans for the Stonehenge Tunnel to unlock that blockage on the A303. So there are real plans there already in place that these 2 men will deliver.
Has enough happened? Because, of course, in 2015, there were all these promises. Has enough happened quickly enough from your point of view, though?
Well, as a Member of Parliament for Torbay, I'd love to see this sort of stuff happen more quickly, but I accept particularly things like the Dawlish Sea Wall project and the Teignmouth Cliffs, that there is a local community to engage with, and also environmental concerns as well. But the priority is these works are now starting. You can literally see the Orange Army on site in Dawlish building a new seawall.
The two men claimed to understand the problems we have in the West Country whilst talking about promoting Jeremy Hunt wants HS2 to have the third runway at Heathrow, huge projects elsewhere in the country. How do you hold them to their word, whoever becomes Prime Minister, that they don't forget our part of the world?
Well, it's clear we can see work already got underway, and also the fact that a number of us are in government, that we hold positions where we can literally shape the agenda to benefit our region. But also, let's be clear, projects like Heathrow directly benefit my constituency. If you're a Torbay business that needs to access a long-haul market, you're going to be flying via Heathrow.
You mentioned your ministerial role. You've got a number of ministerial roles at the moment, one of them being Wales Office Minister, which has a big impact on part of our region. An idea for a Western powerhouse linking together economically, at least Bristol, with a few of the South Wales cities. What do you think of that? Will that boost our part of the world?
Well, it's certainly exciting to see the ideas coming forward from the region. I'd hope they'd also very much look to work with the West of England Combined Authority and the Mayor from there as well in further development of their plans. But, you know, we want to see cross-border trade enhanced and benefit to particularly looking at some of the parts of South Wales where there are very entrenched issues of poverty and deprivation. So this is an exciting idea, and I hope it can be taken forward.
Just very briefly back to the leadership. If it seems unlikely, according to the bookies, Jeremy Hunt does win, will you serve him? Will you be loyal? Will the party come together at the end of this race?
I think if Jeremy wins, then we have to come together and respect the result of what our members have voted for. What we can't have is people sort of saying, I won't do this and I won't do that. We've got to work as a team and serve our nation. All
right, Kevin Foster, thank you very much indeed. Now, last week, the 6 MEPs from the South West took their seats in the European Parliament. Our 3 Brexit Party MEPs made their voices heard as they marched into Strasbourg with their 26 colleagues. But marching the other way and with the opposite Brexit message were our 2 Lib Dems. I caught up with representatives of both parties and our only returning MEP, Green Molly Scott-Cato. I began by asking her what her main priority is for this next Parliament.
We've seen a very strong vote for the Greens in this election, and also young people mobilising in favour of the Greens because of the climate emergency, and so that's our absolute top priority here. We want to see a big investment programme moving us towards a sustainable economy of the future, and also really deal with the issue of transport, where it's cheaper to fly than it is to travel by train because aviation tax, you know, there isn't an aviation tax. So those are the kinds of priorities we're going to have, and actually we're seeing quite wide support here, so I'm fairly confident we'll make some good progress.
What would you say is your priority, Martin, one of 2 Lib Dems representing the South West?
Well, clearly part of it is our mandate to stop Brexit, so we want to make sure that nothing at this end of the spectrum actually engages with the idea of a hard Brexit, and we need to try and rule that out completely. But actually a lot of what Molly said about the climate emergency and the biodiversity and extinction crisis is also an important part of our agenda too.
How do you stop Brexit from here? Because ultimately it's your colleagues in the Westminster Parliament, and there aren't a huge amount of them, that will be getting the vote on any deal that Mr Johnson or Mr Hunt could or will try and negotiate.
No, that's true, but of course, as Mr Johnson or Mr Hunt will find out, it takes 2 to make a deal, and they have to negotiate with the Europeans, and there is a lot of frustration and irritation at the way the British have handled the negotiations, which is very obvious here already to me. And I think there are people who are inclined to say, well, just get out, and I think we need to tell them we want to stay. We're certainly on this side of the table. We're here to do a job for the next 5 years if we can, and make a positive contribution to European policy making. That's what we were democratically elected to do.
What Martin's saying does have some sense, because actually there's not very much diplomacy at the moment. There's sort of anti-diplomacy between Britain and the European neighbours, and whatever happens, we're going to have to continue to have close trading relationships and close friendships across those boundaries. And there's a sort of quasi-diplomatic role for us here as well, I think, as
You're staying
MEPs.
Very quiet over here on Widdicombe, but I'm guessing you couldn't disagree more with what these 2 are saying.
Indeed. I mean, our aim is the polar opposite of Martin's aim. Our aim is to deliver the result of the 2016 referendum, and I would hope that all 3 of us around this table get our P45s by the end of October. And that is what we're very much working towards. Now, you're going to ask me the same question that you asked Martin, which is what can we do over here when really the decision's at Westminster? I think we've already done quite a lot by topping the poll in the EU elections.
You are the largest individual party.
We are, and we're the largest party here. And I think we've already done quite a lot. And I did notice that after our big rally in Birmingham recently, Jeremy Hunt quite suddenly started talking tough on October the 31st, whereas until then he'd been much more cautious about it. So I think we can have a real impact And as far as while we're here, what will we do apart from represent our constituents, casework and that sort of stuff? We will resist any further encroachment of the EU into our affairs, and in the very unlikely event that there was something which reduced their intervention, we would support it.
May I just pick up on something that Molly just said about diplomacy? Of course, when your group took your seats in the European Parliament here in Strasbourg, you turned your backs during the European anthem. Does Molly have a point about diplomacy where if we are to leave on the 31st of October, we still need to be friendly with the people who are represented here?
Molly made the point that the EU blames Britain for the failure of the diplomacy. Back in Britain, they are fed up with the attitude of the EU. I've even talked to former Remainers who say, because of the way they've treated us, now that's it, we would vote leave next time. So I think that there has been a failure of diplomacy. I think most of it is down to the cat-handed attitude of the British government, but combined with the stubbornness of the EU in not giving any ground. They wouldn't give it to David Cameron, they haven't given it to Theresa May. So I think both sides bear some blame for the mess that we're in. But I'm not interested in who's to blame. I'm interested in how do we get the result of the referendum implemented. That's what I'm interested in.
Now, you're sat on opposite sides of the table representing the two different Brexit arguments. If I had all 6 MEPs sat around this table, there'd be 1 more on your side, 2 more on your side. It's a hint the West Country is completely divided over Brexit. Does being on these two polar opposite sides really help that?
I think what's really interesting is that prior to this election, we had myself being strongly for stopping Brexit. We've now got 3 MEPs in that position, and we had 3 MEPs who were for making Brexit happen. So actually the stopping Brexit position has really gained strength in the Southwest since the election. And I think, we have an opportunity to push that forward here, and that's definitely what we're trying to do, as well as the Liberal Democrats, and that really has strengthened. But the other thing we saw was the breaking down of the two-party system. Brexit has come in like a hand grenade, and we saw that, in fact, our parties which supported Remain gained strength, and the Brexit party was strong. But the Labour and Tory parties are so diminished here, and that's the most interesting change that I see as a returning MEP.
I do not believe that you can derive from the election results in the West Country the position that Molly's just taken, which is that we were evenly divided because people voted for Remain parties. Because there were many reasons that people might have wanted Green. Molly quoted one just now. She said people, getting exercised by climate change or the environment or whatever it is. There were many reasons why people might have voted Lib Dem. But we at that election only put one policy on the table, and if you voted for the Brexit party, you didn't vote for any other policy because there weren't any others on offer.
So a third of the people in the West Country voted for Brexit and 2/3 didn't.
Martin?
And of course we have got, as Molly said, 3 MEPs who are from strongly anti-Brexit parties,
but
and our vote combined was more than the combined vote of yourselves in UKIP.
If I add up the votes,
actually this was a region, but this was a region, remember, that we were told was strongly leave in the referendum, and it's now evenly divided. That's a strong move. That's a strong move against Brexit.
If I look at the votes for the Brexit party, the Conservatives who were promising to get out, albeit with a different message, hopefully through Theresa May's deal, the English Democrats and the small vote for UKIP, it was 49% of people in the West Country voted for parties promising to deliver Brexit. So there is still division.
Which is actually a minority, of course.
Well, it's a narrow,
if
we take out Labour,
that is much more evenly divided than we were told the referendum was in the Southwest. And I think it's very important that even on climate change, we had a consistent message on climate change. We know that many
and maybe that's why people voted for you rather than Remain.
And many people on the Brexit
Does that have a point there, though? That there was one message, and if you voted for it, it was just Brexit.
The point we made during the campaign was that actually the two are very much linked. How can you possibly tackle an issue as cross-border as climate change affecting the entire planet if you don't work with other countries? And the European Union is the strongest mechanism we have for attacking climate change. How can you possibly, tackle things like carbon budgets and renewable energy in one country if you don't take countries like Poland, which have very carbon-intensive economies, with you?
You
have to tackle these things.
If we don't leave the European Union, if you're here for 5 years, will you be joining the campaign against climate change? Because you could be here for 5 years if we don't leave on the 31st of October.
I do not believe, and let me say this, I do not believe for 1 minute that we're going to be here for 5 years, because I think Britain will go quite mad if there's no resolution for 5 years. So I do not believe we're going to be here for 5 years. We may be here beyond the 31st of October. I wouldn't put money on that exact date being honoured. But I do believe we'll be going in the foreseeable future. But let's take your what you asked me. Would we support that climate change agenda? No, because for this reason, there is some global warming. There has been in the past. Predicted global warming for the end of the last century didn't actually happen. So I don't think that things are quite as infallibly set down as suggested. And therefore I ask myself, is it worth unilaterally spending huge amounts of money when, as I've just said, China, India and other, well, they're no longer emerging, other newly developed nations are actually blasting stuff into the atmosphere on a daily basis?
This is really quite a damaging and dangerous approach, because actually it means that we'll be left behind. The global economy is moving away from fossil fuels. We need to be leading that in innovation, in job creation, in sharing the benefits right across Europe. And that's what climate change policy is actually about. It's not a negative policy, it's a positive policy. And
we could probably talk for half an hour on climate change. Let's just, to close this, bring this back to Brexit. You say that, yes, you want to be out by Halloween, but you don't think that
Trick or treated.
Yeah, you're not sure that that date is going to be stuck to. When do you think the next Prime Minister could get us out?
I do not know. I mean, I am still very hopeful that we will get out on the 31st of October. Both Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt, I mean, now the only two candidates for Prime Minister, both of them are now talking about the 31st of October. And I think there is a renewed will in Parliament. I think the Brexit Party has sent shockwaves through the two major parties in Parliament, shockwaves. And there is now, I think, a facing up to the fact that we have got to get out, that we've messed about for too long. However, if that doesn't happen, and we're still here for 5 years, what was the question about what we would do?
When you think you would get out, when you think if the 31st isn't stuck to, which you've already said you're not sure that it will be.
Well, I'm not sure that it will be, but then after that you're asking me to act like Mystic Meg. And I don't think I can actually do that. The truthful answer, and the only truthful answer any politician can give you at the moment in Britain, is we don't actually know for certainty. We only know what we want.
And I'm going to ask you two to act a bit like Mr. May. Of course, you're probably both quite happy that Anne Widdecombe is suggesting that maybe the 31st of October date is going to not be the date that we leave. Obviously, you both want to be here for the full 5-year term, but in your gut, when do you think you are likely to get your P45 as an MEP?
Look, I can see two clear routes to stopping Brexit, either via a general election or via a people's vote. I cannot see a clear route to making Brexit happen, because the Brexit that was promised is not the Brexit that's being delivered, and there has never been a majority for any specific form of Brexit, and that's why I think it's going to be very difficult to deliver it.
And Martin?
And I'm not looking for a P45 at all in the next 5 years, and I think all of this slightly in the short term depends on Boris, which is a very scary concept. But the point about Boris is his main priority was just to get into number 10, and he's been telling Tory party members that he'll do or die over the 31st of October. But when the civil service sit him down in number 10 and explain to him that it's going to be die, then he's probably going to change his tune, and he does that all the time. So I fully trust that he won't see us out on 31st of October, and I don't think the British Parliament will support the kind of scenario that would happen on 31st of October. So I think we're looking at a long extension, and I hope all the way for 5 years.
We will see. I suppose we haven't got that long to wait. Martin Horwood, Molly Scott-Cato, Anne Widdecombe, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's pick up with some of those points immediately now with Richard Graham, Gloucester MP and Jeremy Hunt supporter. Martin Horwood, who you know well from when he was Cheltenham MP, making it very clear that Boris Johnson won't be able to deliver Brexit on the 31st of October. Will your man?
It's going to be difficult for anyone to deliver it by the 31st of October, which is why I think it's important that Jeremy Hunt is not so fixated on this artificial deadline of the 31st of October. If a deal is going to be possible, I think that that will emerge relatively quickly in negotiations, whoever is leader. But it will take time to get through Parliament. The legislation itself will take a bit of time. So it's very important not to be fixated on a specific date. And the EU has made it very clear that they will extend. If there's either a democratic event, for which read a second referendum or election, or for a specific purpose, which would be really getting legislation through.
Jeremy Hunt voted Remain, you voted Remain. Do you believe he can deliver Brexit, albeit if there are a few months, a little bit longer as an extension?
Yes, I do. And by the way, I do think that how we all voted over 3 years ago now is irrelevant. That was that then, this is this now, and none of us are Remainers or Leavers now. We're all trying to leave the European Union. The question is just when and how, two pretty big questions, and I think what's attractive about Jeremy's pitch is that he's very pragmatic. about the detail of the timing, but he's very firm in the goal of needing to deliver this as soon as possible, certainly before an election, and if need be, yes, leave without a deal, but only if there was absolutely no other way of doing it, and prepare like hell beforehand.
Jeremy Hunt's made a big play of being an entrepreneur, and thank you for not saying it so far, but of course he was Health Secretary for the vast majority of his cabinet time. The junior doctors' strike, probably his most controversial moment. He didn't prove himself to be a great negotiator then, did he?
Well, I think actually, interestingly, what he succeeded in doing then was making the case for better safety of patients, and not looking at it, if you like, from a trades unionist point of view, which is what are the best conditions we can possibly extract as junior doctors, but more looking at it from the perspective of, if you're ill on a weekend, your chances of dying or suffering more are much higher than during a weekday. And he wanted to get that situation right. There's no question about the facts. Far fewer people today die than was the case when he became Health Secretary. And I think actually within the NHS there's an enormous amount of respect for what he's done to strengthen the NHS, improve it, and stand up for patient safety.
Now, in the Cotswolds a couple of days ago, we had Boris Johnson playing with a combine harvester. Tomorrow we have both men in our part of the world trying to win over voters. What can Jeremy Hunt, Prime Minister, do for the West Country?
Well, I think there are 2 or 3 things that are available. The first is obviously, which both candidates are looking at, if you like, at the moment, is to see whether a sort of southwestern powerhouse concept actually is going to come alive with specific projects.
We've heard tonight about the Western Powerhouse, the Welsh Secretary is looking into that, but that just involves Bristol, Cardiff and Newport. How do you get any benefit of that in Gloucester, for example?
So there are various big projects that you could look at if you wanted to make a real infrastructure difference, of which, you know, the most sort of spectacular would be a 3rd crossing of the Severn River. You know, probably in between Bristol and Gloucester towards the Forest of Dean. I can see developers reaching for their maps already. But that would be something that would reduce traffic time, reduce carbon emissions, improve the quality of air. And it would also take less traffic through the centre of Gloucester to get round to the forest.
Jeremy Hunt would sign up to that?
That's the sort of issue that I think a future leader would want to look at. I don't think there's going to be time in this leadership campaign for any of these ideas to be fleshed out in a great deal more detail, but whoever the new Prime Minister is will want to do so.
Very, very briefly, Boris Johnson seems the clear favourite. If he wins, will he have your full support even if Jeremy Hunt isn't in the Cabinet?
Incredibly important that whoever wins does have the support of all MPs.
All right, Richard Graham, thank you very much indeed. And that is just about all we have time for this evening. Of course, tomorrow on ITV News West Country, we will have all the build-up to those hustings between Jeremy Hunt and Boris Johnson. We're off next month, back in September. Good night.